Welcome to Jesus is the Deep End. We're so grateful you're joining us as we explore the stories and testimonies of life within the body of Christ at Edgewater Christian Fellowship. Together, we'll hear how God is moving in our church, our community, and in the lives of His people.
Welcome to another episode of Jesus is the Deep End. I'm Nathaniel Duarte, and thank you so much for tuning in. Joining me today is Max Boothby. He's one of the pastors here at Edgewater, and specifically, he is the middle school pastor. Max, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. It's a privilege.
So I'm excited to talk about middle school ministry. But before we get to that, I want to learn a little more about you. So why don't we start with, if you could tell a little bit of your story of how you came to know Jesus and your testimony.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Medford and still actually live in Medford, make the commute here. Don't mind it though. And was going to First Presbyterian of Jacksonville my whole life growing up with my family and made it through the kids wing there, did the junior high school youth group there as well, but always knew something was missing. I just hadn't taken that step. I knew the answers to the questions. I won a chocolate bunny on Easter one time because I brought the most friends. So I was in it. Anyone looking from the outside would definitely think that I was a part of it, that I had it figured out. But there was an emptiness inside, and junior high and high school definitely accentuated that. And so elementary school, you're just kind of floating along anyways. But middle school, which is why I do what I do, is really that proving ground. Middle school is that time where you make a lot of seemingly small choices that are actually huge life decisions. And so the friends that I chose, the things that I was doing and surrounding myself with, then gets magnified in high school. And by the end of that, I was miserable and knew I needed something. And a buddy took me out to Applegate Christian Fellowship on a Saturday night for a worship service. And that was the night, February 2nd, 2008, that I got baptized, gave my life to Jesus. And that was really the start of all of this.
Wow. So how old were you?
I was 17 then. So just before I was about to turn 17, I should say.
So from that process of coming to actually have a real relationship with Jesus and not just knowing the right answers,
yes,
what was that process into ministry for you? What was that initial realization that was something you wanted to do?
Totally. So right off the bat, so February was when I got baptized, and then March is spring break. And so at spring break, we went down to the mission in Carmen Sardon, which is still a huge part of my life, the orphanage that's down there. And so that was just right off the bat, a month into really, truly being saved and having that zeal. That's that time where you're just, I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to do it, and having that just passion to go do something. And so went on that trip and got plugged in with some of the leaders in that way, so that after I had graduated high school, and there was summer camps going on and all of that, those leaders asked me, hey, would you help out with the games at our summer camps? And so I started helping out with games at summer camp. And then one of my best buddies, he was my best man, I was his best man, he became the junior high youth pastor. And so it was just natural to go help out with junior high, to hang out with him. And what's funny is I didn't love it. I didn't even like it, actually. I just wanted to hang out with him. And so I was going on Wednesdays. I was helping out at retreats. I was helping out at events, but was not enjoying myself, was certainly not enjoying the middle schoolers, as I think most people can relate with, because so many people tell me now, man, it takes such a different type of person to be able to do what you do with middle schoolers. And I know the truth of that, because when it wasn't for me, it was certainly not for me. It was not where I should have been. And I ultimately went to a retreat on the mountaintop there, and it was a winter retreat. So freezing cold, there was snow on the ground. And at about 2 a.m. with my cabin of boys being loud, farting and pulling the covers over their heads and comparing smells, and just all the things that middle school boys do that drive you up the wall. I said, all right, I'm going to go sleep on the deck right in front of the door so that if they try to open it, it hits me, so that they can't just sneak out or something. But I was like, I'm not sleeping in here anymore. And then what's funny is Josiah Bossard, who is our kids pastor and young adults pastor as well, he was 12 on that, and I was 22. So now I'm 34 and he's 25. So we're about 9-10 years apart, that sort of gap. And so he was in there in the cabin as a camper and opens the door. And I said, hey, do you need to go to the bathroom? And he's like, no, it's crazy in there and I want to sleep out here too. And I'm like, well, it can't just be you and me out here. If you can find someone else that wants to sleep out here, go for it. And so he grabbed his buddy Mason, who's actually going to be Josiah's best man in his wedding coming up here October 25th. And so just those friendships, seeing those from middle school lasting through. But yeah, so Josiah, that was how we met, was on that winter retreat and being in the same cabin and both just being fed up with middle schoolers. And so slept outside. After that, I told Jake, hey, who was the youth pastor at the time, my best buddy, told him, man, this is not the thing for me. I'll let you know if the Lord changes my heart, but right now I'm not having fun. The middle schoolers aren't having fun. I think they're bummed to see me if I show up because I was the guy that was always, hey, knock that off, knock this off. And it's been a drastic change in that, I would say. So a big difference that I've seen is our most recent Winter Camp 2025, this January, was at Little River Christian Camp. And that's where we've had it the past few years. And we went up there and we take 4 vans with us and as many kids as we can. And it's just super awesome. And right as we were leaving, there's all the students in the vans and all the leaders doing the final sort of walkthrough. And so the students in the vans, unchecked, unmonitored, they're loud, they're honking the horns, they're doing all this stuff. One of the leaders says, can you get them to stop honking the horns? And I've got the bullhorn, right? There's nothing better for power over 12-year-olds when it comes to a camp than a bullhorn. And so I've got the bullhorn, and I could have just said, stop honking the horns, hey, knock it off, something like that. But what I chose to do was say, hey, everyone that is honking the horns at the same time, you need to stop because I can't hear which one sounds the best. So van 1, please honk your horn. And they honk theirs. And van 2, honk yours, and then compared them. And van 2 was a little better. And so, all right, van 2 is our current horn leader. Van 4, give us your honk, and it was pathetic. Van 4 is the one that's kind of looks like a spaceship. It's our newest van. And so it was very like meep and just very this high pitched, not a masculine honk, a little more Toyota Camry honk kind of thing. And then van 5 was this honk that if I was making a cartoon and I needed a horn honk sound, man, that would have been it. And so van 5 was just clearly the winner. And so we announced that they were the winner. We had fruit snacks from packing lunches that hadn't been all taken. And so we gave them all an extra thing of fruit snacks. And then I told them, hey, no more honking the horns. And that's what it is. You have to embrace it. And that's what I wasn't doing when I first started helping out with stuff. And then, yeah, the Lord just really helped me with that. And then also through fatherhood, I think a lot of the stuff that our kids do that can drive us a little bit crazy, if we kneel down and do it with them, all of a sudden it's a ton of fun and we can see why they're doing it. And so, to slow down and enjoy it would be my encouragement to anyone.
Yeah, because it's one of those things. How many years between the I can't stand middle schoolers to the love of middle schoolers?
That's a great question. So I'd say it was a slow thing. It wasn't all at once. And so I'd say there was a 2-year break there, 2-year just of not helping out with middle school. And then I texted my buddy Jake. I had been really praying about it, really feeling like I was supposed to, and let him know, hey, man, I really want to come back, start helping out with middle school stuff. And it was right before summer, and so got to kind of plug in and get to know the kids and then go straight into camp. And I'm a really practical guy, so I love running the camp games. It's something that I'm good at. It's something that I know that if the pastor running the camp can just trust me with, then it's something totally off his plate. He doesn't have to worry about it. He doesn't need to know what's going on even. He just knows, hey, at 1:00 there's games and everyone shows up. And so it's something that I really enjoyed doing and did for Jake for a couple of years. And he said, hey, how come you don't want to be a counselor? And I said, well, it's not that I don't want to be a counselor. I am just really good at running games. It's a ton of work, and so I'd almost feel bad if I wasn't, because that would mean someone else has to, and I know what goes into it, and I just really enjoy it. And he said, no, I think you don't want to be a counselor, and there's a deeper reason there that you need to really pray about. And so I did. I went and I spent some time with the Lord about that, and came back to Jake very grateful, and said, you know what? I don't want to be a counselor because I don't want kids turning out like I did. For junior high and high school, those were really my wandering years. And we can get more into that later, but it was something that if a kid came up to me and said, hey, I'm struggling with this, best advice, hey, good luck. I fell right into all of that. So hopefully you do better than I did somehow, but I'm not the one to give you advice, And he said, the beautiful thing is that we don't want middle schoolers to turn out like us. We want them to turn out like Jesus. And then anyone can do it, as long as you're willing to point them to him. And then our shortcomings even become powerful, where we can use those to say, man, this is how Jesus was so faithful to me. And it's the Paul, there's his strength in my weakness. When I am weak, he is strong. And so using my very story, which I thought was weakness, for God's glory. And that's even what we're doing right now in the middle school group, is all the guy leaders rotating through each week and giving our testimonies. And so because it's Revelation 12:11 that we overcome the evil one by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And so we taught through the miracles of Jesus. There's the blood of the Lamb, and now we're giving all the leaders a chance to tell their testimony. What has the Lord done in your life and shown himself strong on your behalf?
Yeah. So what was that transition point like for you from being willing to become a counselor and to being willing to be more involved in middle school ministry to becoming a middle school pastor?
Great question. Yeah. So for me, as soon as I started counseling, I loved it. All of the games and stuff that I thought I had loved and did, it just paled in comparison to pouring into these students, to having these relationships with them, to students at that first year of camp that I counseled. Our team was the Kangaroo Sharks. And because that's what middle schoolers do, they come up with something like that. And we had this flag, and it was half kangaroo, half shark. It was absurd. And we were giving kids Sharpie drawings of the kangaroo shark on their arms and stuff, and they all wanted it. And it was so funny. And there's still students from that year that I remember. There's still a lot of those relationships that are still open. And now that they're, adults, they're all in their 20s, like Josiah is and all of that. It's just a really cool thing to see, where we're becoming a little more peer-to-peer, but you always have that mentor relationship. You always have that, you were their counselor. And I think it's really cool for them having me being in the position that I am, because there's so many counselors that were there, and who knows where they are now, and how they're living. And so for those students that have counselors that are doing well, it helps them do well. And so there's a lot more riding on our own walk than just our own walk, and realizing that is cool. And so becoming the counselor definitely changed it. And that was what I looked forward to. All the Wednesday nights, the events, all of that stuff, that was sort of the the paving the way so that camp could be camp. That was the deposits in the bank so that we could make that withdrawal at camp of saying, man, let's go deeper. Let's really get into this. And everyone sort of looks forward to that last night camp experience. And it's such a funny thing. But at the same time, because they're expecting it, they're also preparing their hearts for it. And I think that's why it happens the way it does. It's not because it's some emotional thing or something like that. It's something that if they were willing to prepare their hearts for, a Wednesday night in that same way, the Lord would meet him in that same way. But it's an us thing. It's a wall thing. And when they're expecting, to come to camp and to have that experience, the Lord's going to honor that. He's going to meet them there. And so that always just became such a highlight that it was really cool. And yeah, I think just helping out more and more, being at every event, being every Wednesday night, any retreat, everything I could be at. It was almost like I was a youth pastor, but just with a day job, really. And ultimately, that is what it is. For a long time, my title here was middle school youth leader. And I loved that because that's what my volunteers are. They're all middle school youth leaders. And that's what it is. We're all just co-leaders. We're co-laborers. I'm just the one that is freed up to put a lot more hours into it than them by being on a staff position here at the church. But that doesn't mean that I'm, some sort of, we use the word shepherd a lot, which I don't know. I see that in Scripture. I understand that idea, but really we're all co-sheep. And, in me and a 12-year-old that's coming to service on a Wednesday night, he's a sheep and I'm a sheep and we're following the good shepherd. And so to have this idea of me being a shepherd also, man, I can be a leading sheep, a sheep that's trying to help other sheep, and looking out for them. But ultimately there's much more equality in it. And once you sort of make it into ministry, you don't feel different. And so there's not this, when people call me Pastor Max, especially since I'm the middle school pastor, it always feels very strange. And if it's parents, it's for the sake of their own categorizing. But yeah, it always is, man, I'm not Pastor Max. That's such a funny word. But yeah, just making sure that you're always humble with your leaders, and so they don't feel like there's some sort of Moses kind of hierarchy where I'm in charge and you're just all here. But it's that apostles, it's that New Testament, it's that Acts. We're together, we're going out and we're spreading the gospel unto these middle schoolers. And so I think it was an easy transition from being a leader and being a volunteer into when I first got asked to be a youth pastor, which was in Gold Hill. And that was a really sweet time. That was a really cool thing. I was at Applegate and it was really big and really crazy all the time and a ton of fun. And then I ran into this guy that I had built houses with like 12 years ago in Mexico. And he says, "Hey, I'm looking for a youth pastor. Your name keeps coming up." And I had this really crazy week with the Lord of him just really showing me what he had for me in my future. Otherwise, I would have said to that guy, "Hey, good luck. I hope you find one." But with just what the Lord was showing me, I said, "Wow, that's really crazy. Let's investigate that a little more." And that turned into me youth pastoring in Gold Hill for 2.5 years of a church that had, anywhere from 2 to 18 people on a Sunday, and the youth group even smaller. And so there was two times at youth group I drove out there and then drove home because no one showed up. There was 2 times that only one kid showed up. And so we sent them home. We're like, yeah, we can't really do a youth group with one kid. Have you hang out with me and Brendan here kind of thing. And so, and then all of a sudden you keep that time in, you keep that consistency. And I wasn't counting it, but after a while you notice the growth, and we were breaking up for Ultimate Frisbee, and it was like, hey, you 7 over here, you 8 over there, and I'll be with the 7. And I'm like, wow, when did all these kids start showing up? This is crazy. And it wasn't that their parents were going to church, because the church didn't grow. We were still 2 to 18 on a Sunday. But we had kids riding their scooters and their bikes and their skateboards over to the youth center there in Gold Hill. And it was just such a cool thing to see. And at the end of that first year, we did a Reading water slides trip that was paid for by the church. We asked those 2 to 18 people, hey, do you guys want to come together on this? A lot of times $20 towards youth ministry can feel like a big so what, but that's admission for the Reading water slides. So that'd be really cool if you guys want to help sponsor that with me. So it's not just my wife and I doing that. And we were able to pay for all the kids and all of their lunches. There was a family that catered at the church, and so they pulled in on that, and we wound up taking 42 kids. And it was 42 kids that I knew by name. It wasn't someone that just grabbed, 8 friends or something and said, hey, there's this free trip, you should come on it. It was all kids that had been coming, and there was still a big handful of kids that weren't. And so just that time in, that consistency, and what the Lord had really put on my heart there was do the work, and coming from Applegate and going there and going, wow, what am I doing? And the Lord just said, do the work. Just focus on me and focus on these kids and focus on what you're doing and not what it looks like and not how many or how deep it is. Just do the work and see what happens. And so that was really cool, because I took a year off in between that and being hired here, just volunteering under Josh Knox. And then when he moved on and they said, hey, what do you think about being the middle school pastor? And I said, wow, I wasn't thinking about being the middle school pastor. I was excited to see who it was going to be, but not me, and continue just volunteering. And I had a job that was a career for really the first time, and all these benefits and stuff, and quite a aggressive benefit package, and was just really starting. My first day here was my 3rd year at that job. And so I had just gotten my 3rd week of vacation time and all of that kind of stuff, and was well on my way to being vested for the 401k and all those things. So you start going, wow, like I have 4 daughters, I can't be all nilly-willy. And but my wife and I prayed about it and said, man, this is the thing. And the Lord put on my heart, just do the work. It's still not going to look like what you think it's going to look like. I had come from Applegate. I had an idea of what big church was going to look like. And I started in June. So it was a week into me being here was then summer camp. And I thought, awesome, summer camp. Last night kind of stuff again, man, some depth. Man, these Gold Hill kids, we were really just working on the basics, the fundamentals and stuff like that. And so, okay, here we go. Here's some kids that have probably grown up through the kids wing, and so they're going to be solid, and we've got solid families, so we're going to have solid students, and this is going to be awesome, and there's going to be so much fruit, and it's going to be visible, and there's going to be a harvest, and this is going to be great. And so went to camp, put in all this effort to make it like the camps that I was used to throwing. And so just this huge thing. And we did the final night thing, and there just wasn't the response that I thought there was going to be. And I said, Lord, what is this? And he said, do the work. And it just reminded me, man, it's not about big church. It's not about small church. It's just about that relationship. And for me to be here for a week and expect some sort of depth just because there's a width to the body, it's not going to be there without relationship. And so to just get plugged in, and now doing it for 4.5 years, seeing the depth, seeing the growth that's down. We don't want to be a mile wide and an inch deep. And so seeing these students that have a walk with the Lord, having baptized probably 50, 60 of our middle schoolers, it's just been such an incredible experience of seeing the questions they ask, seeing the things that they're going through, but the way that they're handling it. There's there's a lot of fruit to it, and still for me, it's do the work. It's just keep doing it, and you may never see the harvest, and that's the picture that the Lord put on my mind then when He had told me do the work was, we have this idea of there's one that sows and there's another that tills and, is pulling weeds and is pruning and doing all this. And then someone else comes and harvests. And I have this idea of, okay, I plant the garden, I do a lot of the work, and then my kids go and they pick all the tomatoes and eat them, right? And so I still get to see the harvest being enjoyed, even if it's not by me. But really, culturally, the people this would be written to is there's a group of nomads that sows, and they have sowing utensils for raking and hoeing the fields and making rows and planting, and then they move on. And by the time they've rotated back around, they're just hoping that there was someone else there to work it and work it and work it, and then eventually harvest it and then till everything back in so that they can do their job again. And so for me, it's do the work. And I might not see what someone else does later on in life, but to just do the work and trust in God. So
let's talk a little bit about middle school ministry. I think it's like there's like this news cycle of studies come out, kids are doing this, kids are doing that, this percentage is struggling with this percentage is struggling with that. But from a boots on the ground perspective, what kind of, I guess you can answer it in two ways. What kind of challenges are middle schoolers facing? And then what kind of opportunities and growth is available to them as well? Yeah.
For challenges, man, social media like never before. And just the things that does to the human brain is crazy. The studies they do on it, and seeing the dopamine releases, the addiction responses, the ways that we can become so dependent on something that fits in the palm of our hand. And a lot of times these things are showing more brain atrophy than if we were doing drugs. And so it's, man, would we let our kids do drugs? No. Does your kid have a phone? Yes. And it's like, wow, that's, and it's crazy. And we think, well, they have to have a phone. We have to be able to get a hold of them. And, if we didn't, then man, the rebellion would be so crazy, and seeing all these things. But yeah, the depression, I think is paramount. That's number one to the things that I see, and the things that ultimately wind up really affecting me. And so, for the highest growing demographic of suicide rate being boys age 10 to 14, should be just a horrifying statistic to everyone. And it's this attack on identity. It's this attack on their entire existence mattering, because being a man is something that's being challenged. And if that's what they're destined to grow up to be, then man, that 10 to 14, that age of realizing who you're to become as a young man and then ultimately a man, becomes a very hopeless time if being a man is hopeless, if all these things in life seem so bad, and people are talking about the way the world is and the way that interest and inflation and all these things, and the American dream is dead. And so these kids, they're just being inundated with things like that, and then they're being inundated through their phones and social media with hustle culture and going, gosh, I'm so far behind, at 10, at 14, thinking, man, I should have been mowing my neighbor's lawn and I should be a millionaire by 18, because there's, kids on Instagram and they've got, hey, follow my journey. This is day 113 of me becoming a millionaire before I turn 18 and stuff. And there's always going to be someone out there like that. There's always going to be someone out there that's doing something better than we are. And so to be faced with that daily, rather than, I don't know, at 10 years old, I was making blackberry forts, in the irrigation ditch. And so it's such a different life that they live. And so, yeah, just a lot of that depression. And I think helping them see it and helping them realize it is just the biggest part. We won't fight an enemy that we don't know we have. And so to get them to realize why they feel the way they do and to put purpose to the pain in those ways. And so we had, a student that was dealing with depression, and I said, do you realize how much value your life has? And he said no, obviously. And I said, yeah, well, think about it from this perspective. Your life has so much value that God is warring against Satan, and Satan is warring against God over your soul. That they view you as having enough value, as warring over your soul with all this stuff you're feeling, all this stuff you're going through. Man, it's because the enemy doesn't want you to be his. And if you become his, he wants you to be miserable because of it. And so Screw Tape Letters is a book that I love, and it just talks about trying to prevent someone from being saved, and then ultimately once someone is saved, trying to make them miserable from a demon's perspective. And so it's almost like a playbook of the enemy through C.S. Lewis's just beautiful artistry of writing and literature of that book. And so reading that has been really helpful for some of them if they're a little older. That's more like 13, 14, maybe not 10, 11. And yeah, just equipping them with knowing what their purpose is to a degree, where we all struggle with different things. And so if a kid is struggling with procrastination, if a kid is struggling with organization, I tell them, hey, there's other people that don't struggle with that. But you know why you struggle with that? It's because you're going to go do something. It's because you're going to go do something big. And by procrastinating and by not being organized, the enemy's keeping you from that. Man, someone that's struggling with depression and anxiety, but when they get around the right friends, man, they're loud and they're funny and there's just this joy to them. But then when they're in a different group, in a different setting, they don't have that confidence. All of a sudden, you don't see that side of them. And I say, man, that's the enemy attacking you, because you do have a voice. You are very charismatic, and that attack is to directly go against your gift. And so your gift of charisma, your gift of, people being drawn to you is under attack through anxiety, is under attack through just this peer pressure to be cool and to fit in. And so it's a lot of times our callings and our gifts is where we're going to see the attack. And I feel it. I would, much rather procrastinate and do something else. And I found myself preparing for an event that's in February instead of preparing for an event that's in 3 weeks, and still preparing for an event. Oh, that's great. But man, I think the enemy would be more content with me preparing for something in February than something in 3 weeks, and have that just not go as well, or the teaching not be as impacting, or just have it feel disorganized or whatever it is. And so knowing that wherever we're feeling attacked is generally where our very calling and our very gifting is pulling us into.
Let's spend a little bit of time on the social media, technology, overstimulation that kids feel in today's present world. What advice would you have? You talked a little bit about to kids, but what advice would you have to parents listening, where they're, where, like you talked about the whole fitting in and being cool. It's one of those peer pressure things where you don't let the kid have it, all their friends have it, and there's that feeling of being left out. What kind of guidance could you give to parents?
Wow. Yeah, because it's so easy to just say, don't let them have a phone. But that's so much harder in practice, great in theory, but how do you actually play that out? And so ultimately, monitoring it, ultimately when they get home, the amount of students and parents that I've met with over the years, because the student gets home, they take their phone, they go into their room, and then they come out for dinner and they go back into their room. And then I'm meeting with them because they're miserable. Well, of course they are. We need to be out. We need to be doing something. We need to be surrounded by other people. I tell the students, depression hates a moving target. And so if you're just doing something, it makes such a huge difference. And so a lot of times I talk to the student and the parents together. I'll talk to the parents alone, and then I'll talk to the student alone. And it really helps me get to what the student's actually feeling. And so talking to them together, you're never going to get anywhere, but it's important to do. Talking to the parent alone, you're going to get this frustrated side of things that isn't seen through the lens of their child well. And then you are equipped then at least to go and talk to the student about it. And they don't want to just sit on their phones is what I've found the most of. And there isn't this overwhelming desire to keep scrolling. They call it exactly what it is. They all do. Like, that's their lingo, is that it's doom scrolling, that it's brain rot. They call it for what it is. They know what it is. And they just want a reason. And so for the parent to be willing to be that reason, and there is going to be pushback to say, hey, let's go on a walk. Hey, let's go do something. Hey, let's play a game. I don't want to play the game. Hey, is there a game you do want to play? Is there something you do want to do? No? Okay, well then walk's the easiest. Let's go on the walk and tell me about your day. And I don't want to tell you about my day. That's fine. Let's go on a walk in silence. And ultimately, people hate silence, and they're going to say something. But being willing to be that reason. And, so many of these kids that are 11, 12, 13, you roll that back 3 years ago, they were 8, 9, and 10. And so, man, at 8, 9, and 10, parents are living the dream. They're going, man, if my kid's bummed out, hide and seek will fix it. We can just go get ice cream. There's all of this stuff. And then I meet with these students, and they tell me everything that's going on. They tell me how everything's making them feel. And then I ask them a question that they've never really thought about, because they've never really felt like they would have the power to do something about that question being asked to them. So they've never asked it of themselves, is what would you like for your relationship with your parents to look like? And most typically that is met with tears. And they break down and they look back to not their childhood of being 4, 5, and 6, but something 2 years ago. And they go, man, I'd love for my dad to still read to me. And this is a middle schooler, I'd love to just play cards with my mom. I'd love to, a lot of it's the parents don't know what to do. And so the parents are kind of pulling back, and society's telling them to, culture's telling them to, is this is the time that your kid is turning into themselves, when they're establishing an identity and all this stuff. And so give them room and give them space. And what that feels like on the student's end of things is they don't care about me. And then the student lashes out and the parent gives them space. And what that feels like on the student's end of things is, man, I'm not worth the argument. I'm not worth the awkwardness of a conversation, of them coming and talking to me more about this stuff that I'm going through. And so they're just letting me go through it on my own. And so ultimately, for parents to just be super engaged in everything that parents pull back from in all the different meetings that I've had, it's because there's a fear of triggering something. Ultimately, the biggest fear would be triggering suicidal thoughts or tendencies. But that's something that studies show time and time again. If parents are having that conversation with their kids are like entirely off of the spectrum of making that decision. And so that's a conversation that if parents are willing to have with their kids, man, they're so depressed, I don't want to like reinforce this or do anything to make this worse or even plant that idea in their minds. They're being exposed to that kind of stuff that's being talked about. Like I said, 10 to 14 is that highest growth demographic of it. And so it's something that they have faced. It's something I've faced every single year of doing youth ministry, is a middle schooler in the community taking their own life. And so for parents to be willing to have those conversations, but also just whatever it is. And so ultimately, it started with social media and what advice to give there. But that is where it ends. That's where it culminates. And so just making sure that you're pushing for that relationship, because they're pushing against it, but they're pushing because they want to find out who they are. It's always this identity that's always been wrapped up in parents. In middle school is when it first begins to change, is when you first begin to become yourself without being associated with your parents. And so really, man, these elementary kids, the closer they are to their parents, a lot of times the harder back they will push against their parents to find their own identity, because their identity has been so encapsulated in spending time with their parents and doing things as a family and all of that. And there's certainly families that continue just to do things and to do all of that. And so it's not the rule by any means. There's always going to be exceptions to these things. But for the most part, yeah, there's that push. And really, studies have shown there's a chemical imbalance in the brain where your middle school aged student up until high school is going to have like this strange like internal repulsion to family where they don't want to be home, they don't want to spend time, and so there's been studies done on it, and there's all sorts of different theories on why that is, and they're all different and equally interesting. But ultimately, what matters isn't why science thinks that it happens, but that it happens. And parents tell me this all the time. Well, that's what I've been telling them for 3 months. How come you said it once and it works? Because they are being wired right now by their brain and by their hormones to disregard what you're saying, but take that same advice from someone else and apply it to their lives. And so that's a lot of what I get to do, is tell kids all the stuff their parents are already telling them, and have them go do it. And so it's kind of fun.
So as we kind of start to wrap up, I'm curious, you have a lot of kids that come to middle school youth group, a lot of kids that come to camps. What do you wish parents knew about the work you're doing, about what their kids are hearing and experiencing? Is there anything specific that you wish parents knew about the middle school ministry?
Oh, man. Yeah, that it's theirs, that they are the middle school pastors. They are the middle school shepherds of their family, of their children. They are the meat and potatoes, and I am a supplement. I am just a vitamin in the mix. And I've gone years without taking vitamins. And sometimes I don't even notice a difference. But parents will bring students to youth group, like 1 hour a week in a building with 100 other kids is going to do something. And, if I was fasting and just taking vitamins, I would die eventually. But that's a lot of parents' approach to the spiritual walk of their middle schoolers. And so what do parents need to know about middle school ministry? That they are the forefront of middle school ministry if they have a middle schooler. And I'm just here. I'm just doing my best to fill in the cracks, but that's it. I can't be the main part of it. A lot of your students' walk is going to be based off of what they've seen, not what they're told. And so to model what they want to see in their kids, the things that they're correcting their kids on, making sure that they're walking that out. And that's, as a father of 4, that's a conviction to me, and so that's not something that we perfect. That's something we have to focus on day by day. And so, for me, there's only so much I can do, and I try to do it. It's do the work, right? Is what's always been on my heart. But there was a Wednesday night, and we had about 100 kids in here, which you could look at 100 kids and you go, gosh, this is great. This is amazing. We got 100 students in here. And so I asked, how many of you guys go to South Middle School? And on that given night, there's, any amount of kids from South Middle School on whichever night, but 2 of them raised their hand. And I said, okay, I looked it up earlier because I was curious before that night. And I told them there's 633 students at South Middle School. And that was last year. I'm not sure what the number is this year. And I said, and 2 of them are here. Hopefully the other 631 are at a different youth group. But what do you guys think? The work is not done. Do the work. And I can't reach them all. I mean, I'm going to South Middle School later today, right after this is over, actually. But I can't reach 633 students. And if I do, it's not going to be in a meaningful way. And so for the parents, I've always felt with middle school ministry, the best thing I could do is equip parents. And so that's always been a question of how can I do that? If that's partnering with Carrie, with the men's stuff, with marriage stuff, if that's partnering with just some of the other pastors here that do those sorts of things, more of the marriage side of things, or if it's me doing something. And I've looked at different events to bring families in, but ultimately you do something like that, and it's the same thing of having a marriage retreat, right? Sometimes the people that need it the most don't show up, and so I can have events, I can have things, but to really reach the ones that need to be reached, I pray for diligent students to invite them to youth groups plural. If it's not ours, great. There's amazing youth groups in Grants Pass and in this valley that preach Jesus and have adults that are consistent, and that's what students need, is consistent adults that believe in them and give them a reason to believe in themselves. And for us to just spread out, be plugged in. I pray for teachers that are believers to just stand firm in their convictions, and for more of them to be hired at these public schools. And that's ultimately the war is not here. The war is not at Edgewater. The war is, it's day-to-day life. This is an equipping. This is a time to come together and recharge the batteries. But if people make this the point and this the purpose, I've pulled up next to families in a parking lot, and I never would have guessed, based off the way that things are being conducted, that they find themselves at church. And so this can't be the place you go and just think, all right, cool, we went to church and now we're good. So it has to be the lifestyle.
Absolutely. And we are, as for the final question, we're recording this on a Wednesday. It's going to be released on a Wednesday. You've got a few hours before middle school youth group. And as you walk into that event where there's all those middle schoolers, and you've touched on it throughout this episode, but to kind of boil it down, what's your biggest heart's prayer and desire for the middle schoolers that you're ministering to either know in, grow in? What's your burning desire for them to know?
Oh man. Did you go to middle school youth group growing up?
I did not.
You did
no.
Not. Okay. I did. And I don't remember hardly anything. I remember one time doing worship, not being part of the worship team, but I just remember worship one time specifically, and I think it was because someone messed up. I remember one game specifically, which was broom ball, and the broomsticks were not sticks, they were the aluminum handles, and they started breaking and gashing people open. And I think collectively there was over 100 stitches that happened because of that night. It was crazy. Everyone's forearms were gashed up. So I remember very few things from youth group. I definitely don't remember anything that was ever said. But what I do remember is how it made me feel. I remember the leaders that cared. I remember Mark Schmore. I remember Tim Plankenhorn. I remember Sarah. I remember these leaders that went above and beyond, these leaders that did extra, these leaders that had meaningful conversations. And like I said, I can't remember the conversation, but you remember how it made you feel. And I see them still in community, and they still have that mentor role in my heart. You know, they're in their 40s, I'm in my 30s, but it takes me back to middle school. It takes me back to a time that my heart and my emotions were dependent on someone else, and they were that someone else. And so my goal for a Wednesday night is for the students that leave here to be excited to come back. My goal is for them to remember how it felt, because they're not going to remember what was said. We get really hung up on wanting to say the right thing, the perfect thing. There's never really a perfect thing to say, but we get so hung up on it. But that doesn't matter. There's just that being there with them, that spending the time, that love is a 4-letter word and it's spelled Time, that whole thing. And this is what I encourage all my leaders into, is just, man, spending that time with these students, that when they look back, if it's in high school, if it's in, their early young adulthood, and they've gone down the wrong path, they can look back and think, when was the last time that things were going well for me? When was the last time I felt loved? And they go, gosh, it was at church. And so for them to have that anchor point, for them to have something that they can hold on to, that starts here, that starts now for them at this pivotal age, at this time that they're really just developing emotionally, for us to be able to put into just that, their open hands of give me a reason, give me a so what, is just love, and it's not fun, and it's not being silly, and it's not all of those things that people can think youth group is or try to dumb it down to, because when their friends at school come along and say, hey, let's go do this thing we're not supposed to do, when temptation comes, when sin arises, they're not going to go, you know what, that sounds good and fun and all of those things, but you know what, my youth pastor is really funny, so I'm just not going to do that. They need to know that there's adults in their lives that love them, that believe in them, that have just the best intentions for them and are praying for them and going to be checking in with them. And ultimately, they don't want to have to lie to us. And so for them to go, oh, you know what? I'm going to be at youth group, and they're going to ask me how my week was, and I don't want to have to lie about it. And so, man, I'm not going to do that thing, or I'm not going to say that thing or watch that thing. And so for us to be a part of their story in that way is the goal, for us to be a reason for them, for us to give them a reason to believe in themselves because we believe in them, a reason for them to love themselves because we love them, and a reason to see themselves the way that the Lord sees them, because that's how we do. And so that's the goal. That's the hope.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and sharing the work you're doing. I'll be honest, I'm one of those people that I watch you and I watch the leaders with the middle schoolers and I go, what a saint. Yeah. Because it's such a gaggle of children just roaming around the campus, and I go, God bless those people pouring their lives and time into those middle schoolers. It's a blessing to watch and to know the heart behind it and the work being done. Would you close our time in prayer?
Absolutely. Jesus, I do just thank you for this podcast, for the people that it's going to reach. Lord Jesus, I pray for all of the middle schoolers here in Grants Pass specifically, but around the world ultimately, that are just going through life, that are certainly in the middle of something and they don't know what, and neither do we. And so it's so fitting to call it middle school, that, Lord, they're just in the midst of it, that they're in battle, and that our enemy doesn't fight fair. Where we would not send children to war, he is already warring against them. And so, Father, we pray for strength for them. We pray for diligent parents, diligent teachers, diligent friends, Lord, diligent Christians in their lives, to be praying for them also, to be coming alongside them, to be encouraging them, to be uplifting them. And so, Lord, for the middle schoolers that attend here, that you would give me ears to hear and eyes to see, Lord, that I would be able to do the most good and spread my time out well. Lord, for all my middle school leaders and volunteers, that you would do the same for them. Lord, that we would just be able to plug in, and that no one would come to a Wednesday night, no one would come to youth group and feel like they weren't seen, like they weren't loved, and like they didn't matter, Lord, because that's how the world wants them to feel, and it's not how we want them to feel. And so, Lord, that you would help us to see those that feel unseen and love on them the way that you would. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you for listening to Jesus is the Deep End. If you'd like to connect, ask questions, or share feedback, we welcome your comments at jesusisthedeepend@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at JesusIsTheDeepEnd. To learn more about Edgewater Christian Fellowship in Grants Pass, please visit edgewaterfellowship.org. Until next time, our prayer is that you encounter God in praise, prayer, preaching, and community, that He transforms the world through you.